All right, so let's dive right into this whole TikTok situation. It's really starting to heat up. We've got a potential ban looming here in the U.S. set for January 19th. And we've got some serious reading material to get through for this deep dive. 3 articles from U.S. News and World Report and the Associated Press, all covering the recent Supreme Court arguments about this whole thing.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Huge implications for millions of Americans.
Yeah.
We're talking about 170 million Americans potentially losing access to TikTok.
Wow.
A lot of those users rely on it for income or creative expression or just connecting with others.
Yeah.
So it's not just some tech drama,
Yeah.
This has real-world consequences.
Definitely. And Congress isn't messing around here. They passed a law demanding that ByteDance, TikTok's Chinese owner, either sells the platform or faces a complete shutdown in the U.S. And they're citing national security risks as the main reason behind this.
Right. And that's where things get really interesting. The core issue at play here is data. The government is worried about a foreign adversary potentially getting its hands on the massive amount of data that TikTok collects from its users.
Okay, so break that down for me a little bit more. What kind of data are we talking about, and how could it actually be a risk?
Well, we're talking about everything from the videos you watch and who you follow, to your location, browsing history, even potentially biometric data like facial recognition scans. The concern is that this data could be handed over to the Chinese government, even if TikTok says they wouldn't do that.
So even if TikTok is saying they're protecting user data, the government's not convinced.
Exactly. The concern is that under Chinese law, ByteDance could be compelled to share data with the government, regardless of their own policies.
It's tricky.
It's a tricky situation because it raises questions about how much control governments should have over tech companies, especially those operating internationally.
Yeah, for sure. And what's the Supreme Court saying about all of this? What's the vibe from the recent hearings?
Well, it seems like both liberal and conservative justices are leaning towards upholding the ban. Chief Justice John Roberts even said that Congress's concern isn't about TikTok's content itself, but about the potential for a foreign government to gather information on millions of Americans.
Wow, that's a pretty strong statement. So does this mean TikTok is doomed? Is there anything they can do to avoid a shutdown?
Well, the Biden administration has argued that upholding the ban might actually be the push ByteDance needs to finally sell TikTok to a U.S. company. They even pointed to Elon Musk's Twitter takeover as an example of how quickly these mega deals can happen.
That's a good point. But wouldn't selling TikTok mean that ByteDance would have to give up their secret sauce? You know, their algorithm. That's got to be a tough pill to swallow.
It is. The algorithm is what makes TikTok, well, TikTok. It personalizes your feed, it determines what goes viral, and basically drives the entire user experience.
Okay, so help me understand this a little bit better. How does the algorithm actually work? What makes it so special and so valuable?
It's all about machine learning. The algorithm analyzes your activity on the app, what you watch, like, comment on, share, and use that data to predict what other content you'll enjoy. It's constantly learning and refining its recommendations, which is why it's so good at keeping users engaged.
So you're saying that without that algorithm, TikTok wouldn't be the same platform anymore?
It would be a completely different experience. And that raises the question of whether a U.S. company would even be interested in buying TikTok without its core technology.
It also makes me wonder, what would happen to all the creators and businesses who rely on TikTok if it suddenly went dark?
No, that's a huge concern. We're talking about people like Skip Chapman, a natural deodorant maker who has built his entire business on TikTok, and Lee Zavorska is an esthetician who relies on it for income and reaching new clients.
Wow, so their livelihoods are potentially on the line here. And it's not just individual creators, right? Entire marketing strategies are built around TikTok.
Exactly. A lot of businesses, especially those targeting younger audiences, have invested heavily in TikTok marketing influencer partnerships and building a presence on the platform.
So what happens to those investments if TikTok disappears? Where do those brands go?
They would have to scramble to adapt. Some might shift their focus to platforms like Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts, which are already trying to compete with TikTok's short-form video format.
But wouldn't those platforms have to step up their game to really fill the void left by TikTok?
Absolutely. TikTok's success isn't just about its algorithm, it's also about the community, the trends, the culture that has grown organically on the platform.
Right, it's like a whole ecosystem. So even if other platforms try to replicate the format, it's not guaranteed they'll capture the same magic.
It's a big gamble. And it's a situation that's got a lot of people feeling nervous, especially with that January 19th deadline looming.
Okay, so we're back. And digging deeper into this TikTok ban, and what it could mean for really everyone involved.
Yeah, it's clear that this isn't just about some app on your phone. This is about global politics, data privacy, the future of the internet itself.
For sure. I mean, you mentioned that the government's whole case hinges on this idea that ByteDance, as a Chinese company, could be forced to cooperate with the Chinese government's intelligence operations.
That's right. And that gets to the heart of the national security argument. The government is basically saying that they can't take the risk of China potentially accessing data from 170 million U.S. TikTok users.
Okay, so walk me through the worst case scenario here. What could happen if the Chinese government actually got their hands on all that data?
Well, on a basic level, it could be used for targeted advertising or propaganda campaigns. Imagine being bombarded with content specifically designed to sway your opinion on certain issues.
Yeah, that's a little creepy. Could it get even more serious than that, though?
Absolutely. Think about the potential for blackmail or even identity theft. Your browsing history, location, data, personal information. It's all incredibly valuable to someone who wants to exploit it.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. So it's not just about the Chinese government seeing what silly dances you're doing on TikTok. This could have real consequences for people's lives.
Exactly. And that's why this issue is so complex. It's not a simple case of freedom of expression versus national security. There are legitimate concerns on both sides.
So where does TikTok stand on all of this? Are they just rolling over and accepting the ban?
Not at all. They're fighting tooth and nail. Their argument is that they've never shared data with the Chinese government, and that they have systems in place to protect U.S. user data.
But if that's the case, why is the government so insistent on a ban?
Well, the government's counterargument is that even if TikTok isn't sharing data now, they could be forced to in the future under Chinese law. And they're saying that the risk is just too great to ignore.
So it's like a trust issue. The government doesn't trust that TikTok can or will resist pressure from the Chinese government.
That's a big part of it. And it brings us back to the First Amendment debate. TikTok and its supporters argue that a ban would be a massive overreach, effectively silencing a huge platform for creative expression and communication.
They're saying it's a violation of free speech rights.
Exactly. And they're pointing out that millions of Americans use TikTok to share their views, connect with others, build communities. A ban would cut off those avenues of expression.
But what about the government's argument that those users could just go elsewhere? That the same speech can exist on other platforms?
That's a key point of contention. TikTok's argument is that it's not just about the content itself, but about the unique community and culture that's developed on the platform.
Right, it's that whole ecosystem we were talking about. So even if users migrated to other platforms, it wouldn't be the same experience.
Exactly. And that raises the question of whether a TikTok, stripped of its algorithm, potentially under the control of a different company, would even be viable.
And what about the creators and businesses that depend on TikTok for their income? What happens to them?
Well, it wouldn't be an instant death blow, but it would be a huge disruption. We've already talked about Skip Chapman and Elisa Vorskas, but there are countless others who would have to scramble to adapt.
So what are some of the options for creators if TikTok goes dark?
Some might try to rebuild their followings on platforms like Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts, but as we discussed, replicating TikTok's success isn't easy.
And it's not just about the individual creators, right? What about the bigger picture, the impact on the social media landscape as a whole?
Well, if TikTok disappears, it would leave a massive void. 170 million users is a significant chunk of the U.S. market, and other platforms would undoubtedly try to fill that gap.
So it could lead to a shakeup in the social media world. We might see new platforms emerging or existing ones evolving rapidly to capture those TikTok users.
Exactly. And it's hard to predict what the long-term consequences would be. It could lead to greater competition and innovation, or it could further consolidate power in the hands of a few dominant platforms.
It's also worth noting that the potential ban has already had an impact on TikTok's growth. Some users are hesitant to invest time and effort into a platform that might disappear.
That's true. And some brands are holding back on their marketing spend on TikTok, uncertain about the platform's future.
So even if the ban doesn't go through, the uncertainty itself is causing disruption.
Absolutely. And it highlights how volatile the tech landscape can be. Decisions made in courtrooms and government offices can have a ripple effect that reaches far beyond the companies and individuals directly involved.
And speaking of volatility, we can't forget about the wild card in all of this, former President Trump.
Right. His sudden interest in getting involved adds a whole new layer of complexity to an already complicated situation.
We're back for the final part of our deep dive into this potential TikTok ban, and things are getting even more interesting with former President Trump trying to get involved.
Yeah, his call for a pause on the ban to negotiate a deal Definitely throws a wrench into things.
especially since his former Solicitor General Noel Francisco is now representing TikTok.
Yeah. It's a strange twist, right? His administration was the one that first tried to ban TikTok back in 2020.
Exactly. So what do you make of Trump's sudden interest? Is he genuinely trying to broker a deal, or is this just a political power play?
It's hard to say for sure. Some speculate that he sees this as an opportunity to position himself as a deal maker, a strong leader who can solve complex problems.
But there's also the possibility that he's trying to exert influence over a platform with a massive user base, especially among young people.
Yeah, and let's not forget the potential financial incentives. A successful deal could be lucrative for all parties involved.
So it seems like Trump's motivations are a bit of a mystery, but regardless of what he's up to, his involvement adds another layer of uncertainty to an already unpredictable situation.
Absolutely. And it highlights the fact that this isn't just a legal battle, it's a political one with high stakes and powerful players on all sides.
It's a reminder that technology is rarely neutral. It's often intertwined with political agendas, economic interests, and social values.
And that's why this case is so important. It's not just about TikTok. It's about the broader question of how we regulate technology in a globalized world.
So let's step back for a moment and consider the bigger picture. What are some of the potential long-term implications of this case?
Well, one of the key questions is whether it could set a precedent for other countries to ban platforms based on their ownership or country of origin.
Right. We've already seen some countries expressing concerns about TikTok and other Chinese-owned apps.
Exactly. And if the U.S. ban is upheld, it could embolden those countries to take similar action.
And that could lead to a fragmentation of the internet, with different countries having access to different platforms and information.
It could also raise barriers to entry for tech companies, making it harder for them to compete globally.
So this case could have ripple effects far beyond the U.S. and TikTok.
Absolutely. And it raises important questions about the balance between national security, freedom of expression, and the free flow of information in the digital age.
Yeah, we've also talked a lot about data privacy and how this case has really put a spotlight on the practices of tech companies.
Yeah, TikTok has been accused of collecting vast amounts of user data, and there are concerns about how that data could be used or shared.
This case has definitely made people more aware of the data they're sharing online and how little control they often have over it.
Right, it's prompted calls for greater transparency and accountability from tech companies.
And for stronger data privacy regulations to protect users' rights.
This case could also have significant implications for the relationship between governments and tech companies.
Yeah, governments around the world are grappling with how to regulate these powerful platforms.
Platforms that have become essential for communication, commerce, and even political discourse.
Some argue that greater regulation is needed to protect national security, privacy, and democratic values.
While others worry that excessive regulation could stifle innovation, limit free speech, and give governments too much control over the flow of information.
So the outcome of this case could influence how governments approach tech regulation in the years to come.
It could embolden those who favor a more hands-on approach, or it could serve as a cautionary tale about the potential consequences of overreach.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that the TikTok ban is much more than just a story about a social media app.
It's a complex and multifaceted issue with far-reaching implications for technology, politics, and society.
It's a reminder that we're still figuring out how to navigate the digital age, and that the decisions we make today will shape the future of the internet and our relationship with technology.
Yeah, and it's crucial that we engage in thoughtful, informed discussions about these issues and advocate for the kind of digital future we want to see.
A future that balances innovation and freedom with responsibility and accountability.
So whether you're a TikTok enthusiast, a concerned citizen, or simply someone who uses the internet, this case is worth paying attention to.
Because it's not just about TikTok, it's about all of us.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking.
And we encourage you to continue exploring these issues, engaging in conversations, and staying informed about the evolving digital landscape.